Blue Horse was a leader of the Wágluṟe band of Oglala Lakota, warrior, statesman and educator. Blue Horse is notable in American history as one of the first Oglala Lakota United States Army Indian Scouts and signatory of the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868. Blue Horse was known for a willingness to rescue white men in distress, and the iconic One-Eyed Chief was popular subject for portraitists. Blue Horse's life chronicles the history of the Oglala Lakota through the 19th and early 20th centuries. Blue Horse and his adopted brother Red Cloud fought for over 50 years to deflect the worst effects of white rule, feed, clothe and educate the people, and preserve sacred Oglala Lakota land and heritage. Early life. Blue Horse was the second son of Old Chief Smoke and Burnt Her Woman, and the twin brother of Big Mouth. Red Cloud was the adopted brother of Blue Horse. Red Cloud was adopted by Old Chief Smoke, his maternal uncle, around 1825 at the age of 3 after Red Cloud's parents died. Blue Horse and Red Cloud were raised as brothers and mentored by Old Chief Smoke. As a young warrior, Blue Horse led war parties with Red Cloud against the Ute, Shoshone, Bannock, Arikara, Crow, Omaha, Pawnee and Piegan. Old Chief Smoke had 5 wives who bore him many children. Old Chief Smoke's sons carried the Smoke people legacy of leadership in Oglala Lakota culture into the 20th century. The children of Old Chief Smoke were Spotted Horse Woman, Big Mouth, Blue Horse, Red Cloud, American Horse, the elder, Bull Bear 3, Solomon Smoke 2, No Neck and Woman Dress. Blue Horse married Council Firewoman and had 1 son, Baldwin Blue Horse, and 2 daughters, Jenny Blue Horse and Lizzie Blue Horse. Wágluṟe Band of the Oglala Lakota. The Wágluṟe Band is one of the 7 bands of the Oglala Lakota. The Wágluṟe Band is also known as the Loafer Band. The Lakota word Wágluṟe means one who lives with his relatives, and was used to refer to those who stayed near military forts, the daughters having married soldiers. Old Chief Smoke. Old Chief Smoke was an Oglala Lakota head chief and one of the last great shirt wearers, a highly prestigious Lakota warrior society. The Smoke people were one of the most prominent Lakota families of the 18th and 19th centuries. Old Chief Smoke was one of the first Lakota leaders to appreciate the power of the whites and the need for association. In 1849, Old Chief Smoke moved his Wágluṟe camp to Fort Laramie when the U.S. Army first garrisoned the old trading post to protect and supply wagon trains of white migrants along the Oregon Trail. Lakota families from other camps who preferred the safety of Fort Laramie joined Smoke's camp. Old Chief Smoke was aware of the power of the whites, their overwhelming numbers and the futility of war. Old Chief Smoke observed and learned the customs of the whites. By the late 1850s, some Lakota from the wild buffalo hunting camps began to disparage Old Chief Smoke's camp at Fort Laramie and call Old Chief Smoke's community Wágluṟe, meaning they were like men who lived with the wives' relatives, that is, hangers-on, loafers. On the other hand, some Wágluṟe thought of the Lakota in the wilds as county bumpkins. During the increasing strife of the 1860s, the Fort Laramie took on a military posture and was the primary staging ground for the U.S. Army during Red Cloud's War. In 1864, Old Chief Smoke died and was placed on a scaffold near site of his Fort Laramie and replaced by Chief Big Mouth. Wágluṟe at Fort Laramie. The Wágluṟe were aware of the power of the whites, their overwhelming numbers and the futility of war. Traditionally, in intertribal warfare, a fight among 50 warriors in which 2 men were killed was considered a big fight. The Wágluṟe at Fort Laramie heard of the 50,000 casualties of the 3-day battle at Gettysburg in July 1863, and knew what white men meant when they spoke of battle. The Wágluṟe observed and learned the customs of the whites. Wágluļe were considered by the U.S. Army and Indian agents to be the most progressive band of Lakota, and many became Indian police, U.S. Army Indian Scouts with the U.S. 4th Cavalry Regiment from Fort Laramie, and intermediaries with other bands of Lakotas. The Wágluļe formed a civil administration at Fort Laramie, and Old Chief Smoke appointed Blue Horse and Big Mouth the first Indian police officers. The Wágluļe were first Oglala Lakota to send their children to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, for a formal education. Wágluļe U.S. Army Indian Scouts were a band of brothers with U.S. Army Cavalry Scouts, and later were the first Oglala Lakota to travel with Col. William Buffalo Bill Cody and his Wild West throughout the U.S. and Europe. Wágluļe politics. Some Wágluļe went north to the Powder River country to fight in Red Cloud's War and became closely tied to militant Minneconchu, Sanzark and Hunkpapa. Other Wágluļe supplied food and munitions to Red Cloud. All Wágluļe respected Red Cloud. The U.S. Army concluded that, even if there were doubts about the reliability, the Wágluļe's role as scouts, civil administrators and mediators was absolutely essential. Blue Horse and Red Cloud. Blue Horse and Red Cloud were warriors, statesmen and leaders of the Oglala Lakota for over 50 years. The special lifelong relationship chronicles the history of the Oglala Lakota through the 19th and early 20th centuries. Blue Horse and Red Cloud fought to deflect the worst effects of white rule, feed, clothe and educate the people, and preserve sacred Oglala Lakota land and heritage. The Old Chief Bull Bear Incident. In 1841, Blue Horse was shot in the back with an arrow during a skirmish with the followers of Old Chief Bull Bear, a challenger to his father Old Chief Smoke. Old Chief Bull Bear contemptuously threw dust in the face Old Chief Smoke and challenged him to a fight. After the Old Chief Smoke refused, Old Chief Bull Bear killed Old Chief Smoke's favorite horse, Red Cloud. Old Chief Smoke's adopted son sought revenge, and later during a fight with Old Chief Bull Bear's band killed Old Chief Bull Bear. Blue Horse, who was with Red Cloud, was wounded during the incident. The Old Chief Bull Bear incident was significant in Oglala Lakota history and resulted in the splitting of the bands. Nevertheless, Old Chief Smoke adopted Old Chief Bull Bear's son, Young Bull Bear, and raised him in the Smoke household. U.S. Army Indian Scout. Blue Horse began service with the U.S. Army at Fort Laramie, Wyoming, as early as 1854 when General William S. Harney arrived at the onset of the Sioux Wars. Prior to 1866, Indian Scouts were considered employees rather than soldiers, and on July 28, 1866 by an act of Congress, Indian Scouts were enlisted and paid the salary and allowances as U.S. cavalry soldiers. Blue Horse was one of the first U.S. Army Indian Scouts formally recruited at Fort Laramie around 1866 and had an excellent reputation with the U.S. Army and white traders as a reliable Indian. Blue Horse maintained the trust of General Harney and Red Cloud, and served as a messenger and intermediary during Red Cloud's War 1866 to 1868. Red Cloud's War. The Bozeman Trail. Red Cloud's War, also known as the Bozeman War or the Powder River War, was an armed conflict after the end of the American Civil War involving the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho against the U.S. government in Wyoming Territory and Montana Territory. The Bozeman Trail through the Powder River country was used by an increasing number of miners, immigrant settlers and others who competed with the Cheyenne and Lakota for resources and encroached on the traditional territory to reach gold fields discovered in Montana around 1863. The Powder River country was the last unspoiled hunting ground of the Cheyenne and various bands of the Lakota. In late spring 1866, the U.S. government called for a council with the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne at Fort Laramie to discuss a treaty to gain a safe passage for emigrant settlers through the Powder River country and construct forts along the trail. On June 5, 1866, Red Cloud appeared at Fort Laramie with 1,000 warriors to attend the council, and was outraged to learn that the U.S. Army was bringing in troops to construct forts before the Lakota had agreed to a military road through the area. Red Cloud refused to sign a treaty and left the council in protest, and promising resistance to any whites who sought to use the trailer to occupy the Powder River country. Red Cloud scolded the Peace Commissioner for treating the Indians like children. The white men have crowded the Indians back year by year until we are forced to live in a small country north of the Platte, and now our last hunting ground, the home of the people, is to be taken from us. Our women and children will starve, but for my part one prefer to die fighting rather than of starvation. Great Father sends presents and wants a new road. But white chief goes with soldiers to steal road before Indian says yes or no. Quote, Chief Red Cloud strode past Colonel Henry B. Carrington, and before dawn next day, the Oglala Lakota were gone from Fort Laramie. Quote, Despite Red Cloud's warnings, Colonel Carrington marched into the Powder River country with 750 men and garrisoned forts along the Bozeman Trail. One of the new garrison posts was Fort Phil Kearny, a flashpoint with Red Cloud. Fort Kearny was known to the Indians as the hated post on the Little Piney. Quote, In response, by late summer Red Cloud had recruited a force of approximately 3,000 Oglala Lakota, Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho warriors to oppose U.S. military expansion. The majority of warriors had only bows and arrows and a small arsenal of rifles and ammunition smuggled by Wágluļe from Fort Laramie. Red Cloud's warriors soon strategically attacked supply trains and closed the trail. Carrington, the lawyer who made forts with no combat experience, was logistically unable to provide escorts to whites on the trail or to engage in aggressive operations. Carrington respected the fighting ability of Red Cloud, his better knowledge of the terrain and superior numbers. Carrington was in trouble. Red Cloud and the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho were preparing for battle. The Fetterman Fight Captain William J. Fetterman arrived at Fort Phil Kearny, Wyoming, from Fort Laramie, Wyoming, in November 1866. While Captain Fetterman had extensive combat experience during the American Civil War, he had no experience fighting American Indians. Fetterman criticized Colonel Carrington's strategy and allegedly boasted that, given 80 men, he would ride through the Great Sioux Nation. Junior officers at Fort Phil Kearny were anxious for battle, believed the Indians could be easily defeated, and criticized Carrington's apparent unwillingness to fight Indians. On December 21, 1866, a morning supply train to Fort Phil Kearny was attacked. Fetterman had been sent to chase away a small Indian war party that had attacked a wood party days before and was anxious to go to battle. Colonel Carrington authorized Captain Fetterman to mobilize a detachment of 81 men and gave express orders for Fetterman to stay behind the Lodge Trail Ridge where relief would be difficult. Within a few minutes of departure, an Oglala Lakota decoy party led by Crazy Horse appeared on Lodge Trail Ridge. Captain Fetterman disobeyed orders and took the bait after several of the Oglala Lakota warriors stood on the ponies and insultingly waggled their bare buttocks at the troopers. Fetterman followed Crazy Horse's advance party and raced down and into a valley where more than 2,000 Oglala Lakota, Cheyenne and Arapaho were concealed. The ambush killed the entire 81-man U.S. Army detachment, while combined Indian forces suffered only 14 casualties. The incident, known as the Fetman Massacre by the U.S. Army and the Battle of the 100 Slain and the Fetman Fight by Native Americans, involved the highest U.S. Army fatalities in a single event on the Great Plains until the disaster of the Battle of Little Big Horn nearly 10 years later. General Philip Street, George Cook held Carrington solely responsible for the defeat and relieved him of command on December 26, 1866. Big Mouth and his party was dispatched by General William S. A. Charney and returned on January 16, 1867, after spreading news that fine gifts awaited warrior chiefs if they came into Fort Laramie to sign new treaties. General Ulysses S. Grant, commanding the U.S. Army, moved to court-martial Carrington, but at the suggestion of General William Tecumseh, Sherman submitted the matter to a court of inquiry which subsequently exonerated Carrington. Is did a separate investigation by the United States Department of the Interior. The Fetterman response. Public shock following the incident resulted in reassessment of the government's Indian policy, and a U.S. Peace Commission toured the Great Plains in 1867 to gather information to help bring about peace among the tribes and with the U.S. The commission concluded Native Americans had been provoked by white encroachment and competition for resources and recommended assigning definite territories to the Great Plains tribes. In late summer 1867, the U.S. government changed its policy and decided to use the first transcontinental railroad to transport immigrants. The government decided that a military presence in the Powder River country was too expensive and unproductive and agreed to abandon its forts and withdraw completely from Lakota territory. Intermediary to Red Cloud did not participate in the Fetterman fight. Rather, Red Cloud was with Blue Horse, who had carried tobacco from General Harney at Fort Laramie, inviting Red Cloud and the Northern Oglala leadership to talks at the fort. The reaction was negative, with the tobacco packages thrown in the fire by angry warriors. Blue Horse remained in the Red Cloud's village for several days at the time of the Fetterman fight. Blue Horse's return to Fort Laramie with intelligence is noted in reports of the Upper Platte Indian Agency and accounts by Lakota eyewitnesses. Chief Blue Horse, Chief Big Mouth and other Wágluļe acted as intermediaries throughout Red Cloud's war. Treaty of Fort Laramie 1868. Blue Horse and Red Cloud were signatories to the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868. The treaty was an agreement between the United States and the Lakota Nation guaranteeing the Lakota ownership of the Black Hills and land and hunting rights in South Dakota, Wyoming and Montana. The Powder River country was to be henceforth closed to all whites. The treaty ended Red Cloud's war. In the spring of 1868, U.S. peace commissioners were sent to Fort Laramie. The Treaty of Fort Laramie declared the Powder River country, unceded territory, to be used as a reserve for Cheyenne and Lakota. The treaty also established the Great Sioux Reservation, including the Black Hills and covering the territory of West River, west of the Missouri River in present-day Nebraska, and including parts of South Dakota. On April 29, 1868, Spotted Tail and other Brûlé leaders touched the pen. On May 25, 1868, many Lakota leaders, including Sitting Bull, Man Afraid of His Horses and American Horse, signed. The Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho also signed. However, Red Cloud refused to meet with U.S. peace commissioners until the U.S. Army abandoned Fort Phil Kearny and the Powder River country forts. In August 1868, Red Cloud's demands were met and the Powder River country forts were abandoned and the garrisons removed to Fort Laramie. On November 6, 1868, Red Cloud signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie with Father Pierre-Jean de Smet as a witness. Red Cloud's victory. The Treaty of Fort Laramie was regarded as a great victory for Red Cloud, who defeated the U.S. Army in battle. The U.S. Army Powder River country forts were abandoned and the hunting grounds of the Lakota, Cheyenne and Arapaho had been protected. In addition, the treaty required the U.S. government to issue weekly rations and subsidies to the Oglala Lakota. The murder of Big Mouth. Blue Horse's twin brother Big Mouth was the elder and became head chief in 1864 upon the death of old Chief Smoke. Big Mouth opposed Spotted Tail's leadership and criticized his negotiations with Washington politicians. On October 29, 1869, Spotted Tail called at the door of Big Mouth's lodge and asked to speak with him. On his appearance, he was seized by two warriors, who held him fast, while Spotted Tail drew pistol, placed it against his body, and shot Big Mouth dead. Captain DeWitt C. Poole at the Whetstone Indian Agency reported Blue Horse's shock and anger to Big Mouth's murder. Blue Horse started a violent harangue in the Sioux language. He had a rifle in one hand and a strung bow and a bunch of arrows in the other, and when he dropped his blanket, two Navy Colts and a big scalping knife could be seen in the sheaths at his belt. He was in a raving fury, leaping and bounding about the room as he hurled accusations and threats at Spotted Tail. Big Mouth died toward dawn. Some hours later, Blue Horse came to Agent Poole's office and told him that he felt so sad over the death of his great and good brother that he would have to wash off the paint he had put on his face for the feast the day before and begin mourning. The interpreter warned Poole that if this Indian washed his face and started mourning, it would mean the reopening of the feud and more shootings. The agent would give Blue Horse two blankets that would comfort him, and he would refrain from washing his face and going gunning for Spotted Tail. The blankets were handed over, and the grieving brother went quietly away. Quote, Poole later reported that Spotted Tail made a prompt payment of a stipulated number of ponies to Blue Horse and that Aboriginal law had been vindicated. Blue Horse was pressed to avenge the murder of Big Mouth, but chose the path of non-violence and instead moved with his Wágluļe band to another locality. Red Cloud was also aggrieved by his brother's murder. Nonetheless, Red Cloud continued to work with Spotted Tail in delegations to Washington, D.C., to protect tribal lands, enforce broken treaties and preserve Lakota culture. Delegations to Washington. In 1872, Blue Horse accompanied Red Cloud and a Lakota delegation to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Ulysses S. Grant, waiting decision from President Grant on continued negotiations. Red Cloud and Blue Horse toured New York City. The New York Herald reported the gala event. During the late visit of Red Cloud and his party to New York, they went to the Olympic Theater to witness the funny pantomime of Humpty Dumpty. The Herald says they stalked into the theater cool as a cucumber and took orchestra chairs without saying a word. The wild Indian is a stolid being naturally. He does not believe in manifesting astonishment or surprise at anything, but the ballet was too much for the gravity. Before Blue Horse was half an hour in the theater, he had fallen desperately in love with a shapely girl who performed as a choreography in the ballet. This young lady saw the affection beaming visibly out of the eyes of Blue Horse, and it touched her heart so deeply that she jumped 3 times as high in every movement as her salary would permit. Quote, Blue Horse's opposition to the Oglala census of 1874. In November 1873, Dr. John J. Saville, superintendent of the Red Cloud Agency, ordered a census of the Oglala to enumerate the agency Indians. The food situation was desperate. Blue Horse and Red Cloud opposed the census, knowing the count would result in a loss of rations for the Oglala, and resisted threats from the government to withhold food and supplies. The Cincinnati commercial thus accounts for the refusal of Red Cloud and Blue Horse to allow a census of the people to be taken. They have probably been told by the missionaries how David was punished by making a count of the Israelites, and have cultivated what may be properly styled a theological prejudice to census statistics. We think, however, that those chiefs' theological objections are more like to relate to the Book of Cincinnati Numbers, as they don't want the numbered inferiority made public. Saville's disagreements with Blue Horse and Red Cloud eventually led to a commission to investigate alleged mismanagement at the Red Cloud Agency, and recommend that Saville be removed. Dr. Saville resigned in 1875. Letter to President Grant. On June 5, 1875, the Anglo-American Times published a letter written by Blue Horse to President Grant. The President has received letters from Sioux chiefs unable to accompany the delegation, of which the following from Blue Horse may be taken as a sample. There are 50 families of my people who wish to go to farming. We wish to go to work and do not want white men to run over us. We intend to remain here, and we want neat houses and fences and everything that the white men use. We want a cow, 2 yoke of oxen, and a wagon, also chickens. Whatever the President may give those who visit Washington, I wish a share also. I also want a sewing machine and other farming implements. The Great Father has promised us that we should not starve, and I wish to make a living for myself on these rivers in this way. Battle of the Little Bighorn. After the Battle of the Little Bighorn in late June 1876, the government took punitive actions, including disbanding U.S. Army Indian Scouts, clamping down on the agency bands, and taking a census, creating considerable unrest. On August 31, 1876, Blue Horse was arrested for a short time by General Randall S. Mackenzie for not turning in northern hostile Indian slipping into his Loafer village. Blue Horse continued to serve as an intermediary to Red Cloud after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. New Wágluļe leaders. After the Battle of Little Bighorn and the arrest of Blue Horse, the Wágluļe split into 3 bands. Blue Horse remained leader of one band, and rising young leaders American Horse and 3 Bears led the other 2. Red Shirt was also a popular leader and served as 3 Bears' lieutenant. These leaders had much in common. Blue Horse, American Horse, 3 Bears and Red Shirt all served as U.S. Army Indian Scouts with the U.S. 4th Cavalry Regiment from Fort Laramie led Lakota delegations to Washington, D.C. The children attended the first class at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and joined with Buffalo Bill's Wild West. Wágluļe U.S. Army Indian Scouts from the Pine Ridge Agency, South Dakota, were a band of brothers with U.S. Army Cavalry Scouts and the first Oglala Lakota to travel with Col. William Frederick Buffalo Bill Cody and his Wild West throughout the U.S. and Europe. Veterans from the Great Plains Wars chose to offer the services to Colonel Buffalo Bill Cody and appreciated that Wild West shows preserved Oglala Lakota heritage during a time when the Bureau of Indian Affairs was intent on promoting Native American assimilation.